when a young boy with a blood-stained shirt runs to a black officer, Marcus Taylor, begging for help, it seems like just another neighborhood incident. But as the truth unfolds of violent abduction, a ruthless criminal network, it becomes a gripping fight for survival and justice. Will Officer uncover the mastermind behind the chaos before it's too late? Stay tuned for a story of courage, determination, and relentless pursuit of the truth. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the suburban streets of Riverside Heights, casting long shadows over the rows of neatly trimmed lawns and pristine houses. For Officer Marcus Taylor, a 35-year-old seasoned patrol officer with dark skin and a large frame, this was just another quiet evening on duty. Marcus, a proud single father, often found moments of peace during these shifts, his thoughts drifting to his 8-year-old daughter, Amara, waiting for him at home. Tonight, however, that peaceful rhythm was about to be shattered. As Marcus navigated his cruiser through the tranquil streets, his sharp eyes caught a sudden movement ahead. A young boy, no older than 9, stumbled into the road, frantically waving his arms. Marcus instinctively hit the brakes, his heart skipping a beat as he took in the boy's disheveled appearance. His shirt was smeared with blood, his hands trembling as he clutched his sides. Marcus quickly exited the car, his calm but firm voice cutting through the stillness. "Hey kid, are you hurt? What's going on?" The boy's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, tears streaking down his dirt-smudged face. "Officer, please, you have to help me," he gasped, his voice cracking with desperation. Marcus crouched to meet the boy's eyes, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Take a deep breath, son. Slow down. What's your name?" Ethan, the boy stammered, his wide, terrified eyes darting toward a row of houses down the street. "Ethan Ward. They took my mom and sister. My dad, they hurt him. He's not moving." Marcus's heart clenched at the words. This wasn't the typical lost child or neighborhood scuffle he had anticipated. The fear in Ethan's voice, the urgency in his trembling hands, it all pointed to something far darker. "Okay, Ethan," Marcus said, his tone steady despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through him. "Are you hurt?" His eyes quickly scanned the bloodstains on Ethan's shirt and hands. "No," Ethan shook his head quickly. It's my dad's. He told me to hide, but when I came out he wasn't moving anymore. And then I heard them say they'd come back for me." Marcus's pulse quickened. Time was not on their side. "All right, Ethan, listen to me," he said firmly. "Get in the car. We're going to your house." As Marcus drove toward Ethan's address on Elmwood Street, he kept the boy talking, hoping to gather more information. "Ethan, can you tell me about the people who came to your house? How many were there?" "3, Ethan replied, his voice shaking. "They wore masks. One had a deep voice. He kept yelling at my mom. Another one was limping, like he couldn't walk right. The last one, he was big and mean. He hit my dad really hard." Marcus nodded, committing the details to memory. "What about a car? Did you see what they were driving?" "A black van," Ethan said quickly. "Big with dark windows. It was parked in front of our house." Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the house came into view. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. A faint sense of unease settled in his chest. "Ethan, stay in the car," Marcus instructed, pulling into the driveway. He glanced at the boy, who clutched the seatbelt as though it might protect him. "I need you to stay here where I can see you. Can you do that for me?" Ethan nodded hesitantly, his tear-filled eyes fixed on the house. "Will my dad be okay?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know, Ethan, but I'll do everything I can." Hand resting on his holstered weapon, Marcus approached the house cautiously. The faint creak of the front door hinges echoed as he stepped inside. The living room was a wreck, overturned furniture, a shattered lamp, and broken picture frames littered the floor. A coffee table had been shoved into a corner, one of its legs splintered. But what made Marcus's stomach tighten were the blood smears that led from the center of the room toward the staircase. "Daniel Ward," Marcus called out, his voice steady but loud enough to carry through the house. "This is Officer Marcus Taylor. If you can hear me, call out." A faint groan broke the silence, coming from the base of the stairs. Marcus followed the sound, finding a man sprawled on the floor. His shirt was stained with blood, and a deep gash on his forehead was still bleeding. Dropping to a knee, Marcus quickly checked for a pulse. Relief washed over him when he found one faint but steady. Into his radio he spoke firmly. "Dispatch, this is Officer Taylor. I have an unconscious adult male with head trauma at 27 Elmwood Street, requesting immediate medical assistance and backup." Marcus carefully positioned Daniel to prevent further injury before standing to scan the room. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the nearby kitchen. He cleared each room on the ground floor, ensuring there were no immediate threats, before returning to the living room. Stepping outside, he called to Ethan, who was anxiously watching from the passenger seat. "Ethan, it's safe for now. Paramedics are on their way to help your dad. Stay right there, I'll be back." Ethan nodded, his small hands gripping his knees as though bracing for what came next. Returning inside, Marcus crouched near the bloodstains on the floor, following the trail to the staircase. His gaze landed on a crumpled piece of paper partially wedged under the edge of the overturned coffee table. Pulling it free, he read the hastily scrawled message. $500,000. No cops. 48 hours or you'll never see them again. The stark simplicity of the note chilled him to the core. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was calculated, deliberate. The clock was already ticking. Moments later, the sound of approaching sirens broke the heavy silence. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance pulled into the driveway, their lights illuminating the quiet street. Marcus stepped outside to brief the arriving officers, holding up the note as he spoke. "We're dealing with a targeted abduction," he said grimly. 3 masked suspects. Black van with dark windows. Let's start canvassing the neighbors. Someone must have seen something. We don't have time to waste." The officers nodded, springing into action. As paramedics worked to stabilize Daniel Ward, Marcus glanced back at Ethan, who was still sitting in the car, clutching his knees to his chest. Marcus approached the boy, crouching down to his level. "Ethan, I promise you," he said softly but firmly, "we're going to find your mom and sister. But I'm going to need your help. Can you be brave for me?" Ethan wiped his tear-streaked face, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'll try." As the paramedics loaded Daniel into the ambulance, Marcus's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about finding Sarah and Olivia Ward, it was about justice, about protecting a family from unimaginable danger. The race against time had begun, and Marcus Taylor wasn't about to let them down. The night air in Riverside Heights was heavy, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Officer Marcus Taylor stood in the wreckage of the Ward family's living room, the gravity of the situation sinking deeper with each passing moment. The ransom note, now safely tucked into an evidence bag, felt like a physical weight in his pocket. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war against this family, and time was not on their side. Outside, Marcus found Ethan sitting on the edge of the patrol car's open door, his small frame illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights. The boy hugged his knees, his face pale but determined. He had been through something no child should ever have to face. Marcus crouched beside him, speaking in a gentle but firm tone. "Ethan, I know this is scary, but you've already been so brave. I need you to think carefully. Did you see or hear anything else about the men who took your mom and sister?" Ethan sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "They didn't say their names," he said slowly, his voice trembling. "But one of them, he said something about it taking too long. Like they were in a hurry." Marcus nodded. "That's good, Ethan. That tells us they were under pressure. Anything else?" The boy frowned, trying to recall more. "The one with the deep voice kept yelling at my mom. He said something about getting it done this time." His wide eyes looked up at Marcus, pleading for reassurance. "Does that help?" "It helps a lot," Marcus said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You're doing great, Ethan." Inside the house, the forensic team worked methodically, documenting every inch of the chaotic scene. Marcus stepped back in, careful not to disturb any potential evidence. A technician knelt near the front door, dusting for fingerprints. "Got a partial here," she said, snapping a photo. "Looks like whoever it was didn't wear gloves the whole time." Another officer, examining the blood smears near the staircase, called out, "Looks like Daniel was dragged here after being hit. Could have been an attempt to intimidate the boy." Marcus's stomach tightened at the thought. These men weren't just criminals, they were calculated and ruthless. Every detail they left behind could be a clue, but it also told a story of how far they were willing to go. Officer Taylor, another technician said, holding up a muddy footprint impression. This looks fresh. Size 11 work boots. Likely one of the suspects. Marcus nodded, filing the information away. Every piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of who they were up against. But one question loomed large: why this family? What made the Wards a target? At the hospital, Marcus met with Daniel Ward, who was lying in a hospital bed, his head wrapped in white bandages. Despite his injuries, his eyes were sharp, filled with equal parts fear and determination. "Mr. Ward," Marcus began gently, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need your help. Anything you can remember about the men who attacked you could be the key to finding your wife and daughter." Daniel's voice was hoarse but steady. "3 of them. They kicked in the door, shouting at us. One of them, big guy with a deep voice, he kept yelling at Sarah to get into their van. When I tried to stop them," he paused, wincing at the memory, "they hit me hard. I didn't see much after that." "Do you know why they targeted your family?" Marcus asked, his tone cautious but probing. Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the blanket. "I didn't think it was connected at first, but there's a man, Travis Blackwell. We used to work together. A few years ago, I found out he was embezzling money from our contracting business. When I confronted him, he threatened me, said I'd regret it if I ruined him. I didn't think he'd go this far." Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Did you report him to the authorities?" "No," Daniel admitted. "I didn't have enough proof back then, and he disappeared before I could do anything." Marcus's jaw tightened. A grudge, revenge. It made sense, but it also made the situation more dangerous. This wasn't just about money, it was personal. Back at the station, Marcus and his team reviewed surveillance footage from cameras in the area. Martinez, a younger officer with a knack for technology, pointed to the screen. "Here," he said, freezing the frame. The grainy image showed a black van speeding through an intersection not far from the Ward residence. Its license plate was partially visible, and the dark windows matched Ethan's description. "Good work," Marcus said. "Pull footage from nearby intersections. Let's track where it went." As more footage came in, the van's path became clearer. It had headed toward East Hollow, an industrial area on the outskirts of town. The location made sense: remote, with plenty of abandoned warehouses to hide in. Meanwhile, a call came in from a local gas station attendant. "One of your suspects might have stopped here," the officer relayed. "Guy with a limp bought cigarettes and a few burner phones an hour before the abduction. Surveillance footage confirms it." Marcus's mind raced. Burner phones meant the suspects were cautious, but their stop at the gas station gave them a timestamp and another piece of the puzzle. As the team pieced together the timeline, Marcus received a call from dispatch. "We've got another message on Daniel Ward's phone," the operator said. Marcus's heart sank as he read the message: 750,000. New deadline, noon tomorrow. No excuses. The increased demand was a calculated move, designed to push the family and the police to their limits. Back at the station, Daniel sat with his head in his hands, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. Ethan clung to his arm, his small voice breaking the silence. "Will we see Mom and Olivia again?" Daniel hugged his son tightly, his voice trembling. "I don't know, buddy. I'm trying." Marcus stepped in, his tone firm but reassuring. "Mr. Ward, I know this feels impossible, but we're closing in on them. They're making mistakes, and we're not letting up." "But what if it's not enough?" Daniel said, his voice cracking. "What if he couldn't finish the thought?" Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We're not going to let that happen. Trust me." The breakthrough came late that night. Surveillance footage showed the black van pulling into a warehouse complex in East Hollow. Additional footage from a nearby business confirmed the van's presence hours later, parked behind one of the larger warehouses. "Got it," Martinez said, pointing to the screen. "They're holed up here." Marcus studied the map, his resolve hardening. "Let's move. We'll approach carefully and confirm Sarah and Olivia are inside before making any moves. No mistakes." As the team prepared for the operation, Marcus took a moment to speak with Ethan. Kneeling down, he looked the boy in the eye. "Ethan, I need you to stay strong. We're going to bring them back. I promise." Ethan nodded, his small hands clenched into fists. "Please find them," he whispered. Marcus stood, his gaze fixed on the map of East Hollow. The pieces were falling into place, but the stakes had never been higher. With the clock ticking and lives on the line, the next move would determine everything. The night was oppressively silent as Marcus Taylor and his team approached East Hollow, the sprawling industrial district where the kidnappers had chosen to hide. The area was a labyrinth of rusted warehouses, crumbling brick buildings, and overgrown yards. Shadows stretched ominously under the faint glow of a few scattered streetlights. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, every nerve on edge. The van had been spotted here, and every second that passed without action brought Sarah and Olivia Ward closer to danger. "All right, team," Marcus said into his radio, his voice low but firm. "Let's move in quietly. No lights, no noise. We don't want to spook them." The SWAT team spread out, positioning themselves around the identified warehouse. Marcus took point with his partner, Officer Martinez, who carried a handheld thermal imaging device. Through the screen, faint heat signatures flickered several figures moving within the building. "Got eyes on 3 suspects," Martinez whispered, his brow furrowed as he adjusted the device. 2 more stationary figures in the corner. "Must be the hostages." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "They're alive." "That's good. But we need confirmation before we breach." Inside the warehouse, Sarah Ward and her 7-year-old daughter, Olivia, sat tied to chairs in the corner of the dimly lit space. A single overhead bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over the room. Sarah's wrists were raw from the rough ropes, but she kept her composure, whispering soft reassurances to Olivia. "Stay close to me, baby," Sarah murmured, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "We're going to get out of this." Across the room, the kidnappers argued. Victor, the ringleader, paced back and forth, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded a sense of controlled violence. His icy blue eyes darted toward his accomplices, his frustration barely contained. "This is taking too long," Victor snapped, his voice a low growl. "We need that money, or this whole thing goes south." "Maybe it already has," muttered Luke, the man with a limp. He leaned against a stack of crates, visibly uncomfortable. "The cops are probably on their way. I told you we should have taken the money and split." Victor spun toward him, his expression darkening. "You don't give the orders, Luke. We're sticking to the plan." The third man, Brent, stocky and perpetually scowling, leaned against a table littered with maps and burner phones. "The plan's a joke if the money doesn't show," he grumbled. "What are we going to do with them if Ward doesn't pay?" Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. "Then we send him a message he can't ignore." Sarah stiffened, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew Victor was dangerous, but she also sensed cracks forming in the group's unity. Luke's hesitation, Brent's impatience, they were vulnerabilities she might be able to exploit. Outside, Marcus observed the building, analyzing every potential entry point. The warehouse had a single main entrance and a side door near the back, which appeared to lead to an alley. "They've got limited escape routes," Marcus murmured into his headset. "We can block the van and cover the exits, but we need to confirm the hostages' safety before we go loud." "Snipers are in position," Martinez reported, scanning the perimeter. "No movement outside. They don't know we're here." Marcus turned to his team. "All right, listen up. Priority is the safety of Sarah and Olivia. No shots unless absolutely necessary. Victor is volatile, so keep him talking while we secure the hostages." As the team moved into position, Marcus's radio crackled. "Taylor, we've got a partial visual through a broken window. The hostages are tied up in the northeast corner. Suspects are armed." Marcus exhaled slowly, steeling himself. "Copy that. On my count we move in. Flashbangs first. Martinez, you and I take the side entrance. Team Alpha breaches the main door." He turned to Martinez. "Let's bring them home. 3, 2, 1, move." The coordinated breach was swift and precise. The side door burst open as Marcus and Martinez entered, their weapons raised. At the same moment, the main door was forced open, and a flashbang detonated in the center of the room. The disorienting blast of light and sound threw the kidnappers into chaos. Victor roared in anger, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt. "Don't move," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion. "Hands where I can see them." Luke stumbled backward, his hands raised. "I'm done, man. I'm out," he yelled, dropping to his knees. Brent, however, lunged for a handgun on the table. Martinez reacted instantly, firing a non-lethal round that sent the weapon skidding across the floor. Victor, wild with desperation, grabbed Sarah by the arm, dragging her to her feet. He pressed the knife to her throat, his eyes darting between Marcus and the other officers. "Back off, or she dies," he bellowed. Marcus held his ground, his weapon trained on Victor. "Victor, listen to me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You don't want this to end badly. Let her go, and we can talk." "She's my leverage," Victor snarled. "Without her, I've got nothing." "You've already lost," Marcus countered, taking a cautious step forward. "Your partners are done. Luke's surrendering and Brent is down. Let her go, and you still have a chance to walk out of here alive." Victor hesitated, the cracks in his confidence showing. Sarah, sensing his momentary distraction, acted swiftly. She twisted sharply, driving her elbow into his ribs. The sudden move threw Victor off balance, and Marcus seized the opportunity. "Now," Marcus shouted. The SWAT team moved in, disarming Victor and pinning him to the ground. Sarah stumbled backward, her hands shaking as she reached for Olivia, who was already running to her. "Mommy," Olivia cried, throwing herself into Sarah's arms. "It's okay, baby," Sarah whispered, holding her daughter tightly. "It's over." With Victor and his accomplices restrained, the warehouse was secure. Marcus knelt beside Sarah and Olivia, cutting the ropes from their wrists. "You're safe now," he said softly. "It's all over." Sarah looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." Outside, as the suspects were loaded into patrol cars, Marcus took a moment to survey the scene. The relief of seeing Sarah and Olivia reunited was tempered by the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. Victor was just one piece of a larger puzzle, and Marcus was determined to see it through to the end. As Sarah and Olivia were escorted to a waiting ambulance, Marcus turned to Martinez. "We've got evidence here: maps, burner phones, financial records. This operation is bigger than we thought." Martinez nodded. "And it's not just about the wards. Victor's got connections. If we follow the trail, we'll find out who's pulling the strings." Marcus's resolve hardened. The immediate danger had passed, but the mission was far from over. The clock was no longer ticking for Sarah and Olivia, but for those who thought they could hide in the shadows. Justice was coming. The air around the warehouse was filled with the hum of police radios and the murmurs of officers coordinating the next steps. Marcus Taylor stood in the middle of the chaos, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Marcus knew their work was far from over. Victor's operation was just a piece of something larger, and tonight's success had only scratched the surface. Victor sat in the back of a patrol car, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. His piercing blue eyes stared straight ahead, the once dominant figure now reduced to silence. Nearby, Luke, the limping accomplice, sat slumped on the curb under guard, his face pale and his hands trembling. Marcus approached Luke, crouching to meet his eye level. "Luke, you made the right choice surrendering," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "But if you want any chance of leniency, you need to start talking. Who's behind this? Why target the wards?" Luke hesitated, his gaze darting nervously toward Victor's patrol car. "I don't know everything," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victor, he's not the one pulling the strings. He works for someone else, a guy named Travis Blackwell." Marcus's jaw tightened. The name struck a chord. Blackwell had been mentioned by Daniel Ward, a former business partner turned enemy. "What does Blackwell have to do with this?" Marcus pressed. Luke licked his lips, clearly weighing his options. "Blackwell's got connections. He finds people who owe him, people he thinks crossed him, and uses us to send a message. Victor, he's just the muscle. Blackwell's the one who wanted Ward's family." Marcus straightened, his mind racing. This wasn't just a kidnapping for ransom, it was a calculated act of revenge orchestrated by a man with resources and no conscience. Inside the warehouse, the forensic team worked tirelessly, combing through every corner for clues. Martinez emerged from a side room, carrying a locked briefcase. "Found this under a workbench," he said, setting it on a nearby table. Marcus examined the briefcase before snapping on a pair of gloves. "Let's see what Victor and his crew were hiding." Inside, the contents painted a chilling picture: burner phones with call logs, maps marked with locations, and financial records showing payments routed through shell companies. Among the papers was a list of names people connected to Blackwell's business dealings. At the top of the list was Daniel Ward. Martinez whistled softly as he flipped through the documents. This isn't just about the Wards. This is an entire operation. Blackwell's been running a network of extortion and intimidation for years. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he pulled out a handwritten note. The scrawled message read, "Make Ward pay. No exceptions." It was signed with the initials TB. Travis Blackwell, Marcus muttered. The initials confirmed what they already suspected. He's the mastermind. Back at the station, Marcus and his team worked late into the night, piecing together the evidence. Each new piece painted a clearer picture of Blackwell's operation, one built on fear, manipulation, and violence. Financial transactions linked Blackwell to payments made to Victor and his crew, and phone records tied him to key locations near the warehouse. Blackwell's not just angry at Daniel Ward, Marcus said during a team briefing. He's made a business out of exploiting people he sees as vulnerable or in his way. The Wards were just his latest target. Martinez leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. If Blackwell's as connected as these records suggest, he's not going to go down quietly. Marcus nodded grimly. Then we make sure he doesn't have a choice. The breakthrough came when one of the burner phones recovered from the warehouse received a text message. The message was simple but damning: status update. Deadline passed. What's the holdup? The sender's number traced back to a location, an upscale hotel downtown where Blackwell had been staying under an alias. Looks like Blackwell's getting nervous, Marcus said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Let's pay him a visit. A warrant was quickly secured, and Marcus led a team to the hotel. They arrived just before dawn, the building still bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The hotel lobby was eerily quiet as Marcus approached the front desk. "We're here for Travis Blackwell," he said, flashing his badge. The clerk hesitated but nodded, confirming Blackwell was staying in the penthouse suite. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Marcus's team moved swiftly, their steps silent on the plush carpet. They positioned themselves outside the suite, weapons drawn. "Blackwell," Marcus called out, his voice firm. "This is the police. Open the door or we're coming in." There was no response, but the sound of hurried movement inside betrayed Blackwell's attempt to flee. With a swift kick, Marcus forced the door open, revealing the opulent suite. Blackwell stood near a desk, a look of defiance on his face as he raised his hands. "This is a mistake," Blackwell said smoothly, his tone dripping with feigned innocence. "I'm a businessman, officer. Whatever you think I've done, you're wrong." Marcus stepped closer, holding up the evidence bag containing the note from the warehouse. "This says otherwise, Mr. Blackwell. You've got a lot to answer for." Back at the station, Blackwell sat in an interrogation room, his polished exterior beginning to crack. Marcus stood on the other side of the one-way glass, watching as Martinez prepped for the interview. "He's arrogant," Marcus said. "He thinks his money and connections can get him out of this." Martinez smirked. "Then let's show him otherwise." Inside the room, Martinez laid out the evidence: financial records, phone logs, and testimony from Luke, who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Blackwell's smirk faltered as the weight of the evidence became impossible to deny. "You're finished," Martinez said, leaning forward. "We've got everything we need to take you down, and the DA's ready to make sure you never see the outside of a prison cell again." Blackwell's defiance turned to anger. "You think this ends with me?" he spat. "You're playing a dangerous game, officer. There are people out there who won't let this go." Marcus entered the room, his presence commanding. "The only game I'm playing, Blackwell, is the one where justice wins. And trust me, it just did." With Blackwell in custody and the evidence airtight, the case moved swiftly to trial. Victor and his crew received lengthy prison sentences, while Blackwell faced charges of conspiracy, kidnapping, and racketeering. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts. For the Wards, the nightmare was finally over. Sarah and Olivia began the long journey of healing, supported by Daniel and young Ethan. Marcus remained a constant presence in their lives, a reminder of the courage and determination that had brought them home. As Marcus returned to his patrol duties, he carried the lessons of the case with him. Justice wasn't always swift, but when pursued relentlessly, it was inevitable. And for families like the Wards, it was worth every effort. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Reporters jostled for position in the gallery, their cameras capturing every moment of the high-profile trial. At the center of it all sat Travis Blackwell, the once respected businessman turned criminal mastermind. He was flanked by his high-priced attorneys, his expression carefully neutral, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his growing frustration. In stark contrast, the Ward family sat together on the other side of the courtroom. Sarah, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, held her daughter Olivia close. Daniel sat beside them, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. The young boy's wide eyes took in the room, a mixture of awe and nervousness as he clung to his mother's other hand. Officer Marcus Taylor watched from the back of the courtroom, his presence a steadying force for the family. He had promised to see this through, and today, justice would finally be served. The trial had stretched over weeks, each day revealing more of Blackwell's criminal network. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a damning picture of the man who had used wealth and power to destroy lives. When it was Sarah Ward's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. She recounted the terrifying ordeal with remarkable composure, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "They threatened to kill my daughter," Sarah said, her gaze unwavering as she looked toward the jury. "Victor held a knife to my throat while Blackwell orchestrated everything from the shadows. This wasn't about money, it was about control and revenge." The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting she couldn't be sure of Blackwell's involvement. But Sarah remained firm. "I heard Victor take a phone call," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "He referred to his boss as TB and said, 'We're carrying out your orders.'" Next was Luke, the limping accomplice who had turned state's witness. His testimony was pivotal, detailing how Blackwell had recruited Victor and the others, promising them a cut of the ransom money in exchange for their loyalty. "Blackwell didn't care about us," Luke admitted, his voice filled with regret. "We were just tools to him. When things went wrong, he told Victor to clean it up, which meant killing the Wards if the money didn't come." When Marcus took the stand, his testimony was clinical and precise. He recounted the investigation, from the moment Ethan ran into the street to the raid on the warehouse. He presented evidence linking Blackwell to the burner phones, financial transactions, and the handwritten note found in Victor's possession. "Blackwell's fingerprints are all over this," Marcus said firmly, holding up an evidence bag containing the note. "This wasn't just a one-off crime. It was part of a calculated pattern of exploitation and violence." The defense attorney tried to rattle him, questioning the thoroughness of the investigation. But Marcus remained calm, methodically dismantling each argument with facts. By the end of his testimony, the jury looked convinced, their expressions a mixture of anger and disgust toward Blackwell. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for just a few hours. When they returned, the courtroom was electric with tension. The foreman stood, clearing his throat before announcing the verdict. On the charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, extortion, and racketeering, we find the defendant, Travis Blackwell, guilty. The relief was palpable. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Olivia tightly. Daniel pulled Ethan into a protective embrace, his own tears glistening in the courtroom's harsh light. Blackwell's face, once so composed, twisted in anger as the judge delivered his sentence: 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As Blackwell was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Marcus, his voice dripping with venom. "You think this is over, Officer Taylor? You don't know how deep this goes." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "You're right, I don't, but I'll keep digging until I do." With the trial behind them, the Ward family focused on rebuilding their lives. They relocated to a new neighborhood, far from the memories of the ordeal. The new house was smaller but warm and inviting, a symbol of fresh beginnings. Sarah and Olivia started attending therapy together, finding strength in one another as they worked through their trauma. Daniel threw himself into rebuilding his contracting business, vowing to never let anyone threaten his family again. Ethan, who had shown remarkable courage throughout the ordeal, joined a local soccer team. The camaraderie and physical activity helped him regain his confidence. He still had moments of fear, But those moments grew fewer with time. Marcus visited the family often, checking in to ensure they were adjusting. One sunny afternoon he stopped by their new home. Ethan was playing soccer in the front yard, his laughter filling the air. "Officer Taylor," Ethan called out, running to greet him. Marcus smiled, crouching to meet the boy's enthusiastic hug. "How's my favorite soccer player?" "Better," Ethan said, his grin wide. "Thanks to you." Back on patrol, Marcus reflected on the case. The weight of what had been accomplished settled over him, not in exhaustion, but in satisfaction. He had kept his promise to the wards, ensuring that justice prevailed. As he drove through the familiar streets of Riverside Heights, Marcus's radio crackled with a new call. Another family needed his help. Another case awaited. But for a brief moment, he allowed himself to savor the quiet victory. In his rearview mirror, he could see Ethan waving from the porch as he drove away. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Lives had been changed, and hope had been restored. For Marcus, that was what being an officer was all about. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.